She never calls. She never texts first. But she never fully disappears either. You're not ghosted, yet you're never chosen. You're always the one starting the conversation, keeping the connection alive, carrying the momentum. And somehow, the more consistent you are, the more replaceable you feel. That quiet confusion eats at you. You tell yourself you're being patient, mature, understanding. But deep down, there's a question you can't shake. Am I doing this right? Or am I slowly being trained to accept less? Here's the truth most men miss. This isn't about texting habits. It's not about timing. It's about power and how quietly you've been giving yours away. There are 6 shifts that change this dynamic completely. This isn't a texting trick, and it's not about manipulating her into chasing you. This is a psychological reset for men who are tired of guessing, overthinking, and investing into silence. If you're ready to stop misreading signals and start seeing clearly, like the video, subscribe, and stay with me. Let's break down what actually changes when you stop rewarding the wrong behavior. Number 1. Stop rewarding her silence. When a woman never reaches out first, most men don't see it as information. They see it as a problem they need to fix. So they compensate. They fill the gaps. They send the extra text, make the extra call, do the emotional heavy lifting. Not because it feels good, but because the silence makes them uncomfortable. And without realizing it, they train her. Every time you respond to her lack of effort with more effort of your own, you're teaching her a very specific lesson. That your presence doesn't require participation. That she can stay passive, detached, half-invested, and still receive consistency, attention, reassurance, and emotional access from you. This isn't about her being cruel or manipulative. This is conditioning. Human behavior follows patterns that are rewarded. When silence costs her nothing, it becomes her default. Think about the man who sends the same good morning text every day. He wakes up, checks his phone, sees nothing from her. A small knot forms in his chest, so he reaches for his phone and types first. She replies later. Short, polite, predictable. The next day, the same thing happens. And the day after that. Before long, he's created a routine where she contributes nothing. Yet she still gets the comfort of knowing he'll show up on schedule. Like a subscription she never has to renew. What most men don't understand is this. Consistency without reciprocity doesn't build attraction. It erodes value. When your attention is always available, it stops feeling intentional. When it asks nothing in return, it starts to feel weightless. And the more weightless your presence becomes, the less incentive she has to move toward you. This is where men get it wrong. They assume that pulling back means punishing her, that creating space is some kind of emotional ultimatum. It's not. You're not withdrawing to provoke a reaction. You're withdrawing to stop subsidizing indifference. Silence is not something you fix. Silence is something you observe. It tells you whether she's interested enough to step forward on her own, or whether she was only comfortable because you kept carrying the connection for her. But silence can only speak when you stop talking over it with your effort. That's the shift. Restraint instead of reaction. Don't text because the quiet makes you anxious. Don't check in just to reassure yourself that you still exist in her world. Don't keep proving your consistency to someone who hasn't proven their interest. Let the space exist. Let it breathe. Let her feel the absence of something she's grown used to receiving without cost. Your attention is a currency, and every time you spend it on someone who hasn't invested back, you devalue it further. Not in her eyes, in your own. Here's the uncomfortable truth most men avoid. When you stop rewarding silence, one of 2 things happens. Either she feels the shift and steps forward, or the silence deepens, and both outcomes give you clarity. You're not losing ground, you're reclaiming it. Because the moment you stop covering her lack of effort, the dynamic reveals itself. And that's where your power begins. Not in doing more, but in finally doing less, where less has always been the honest response. Number 2, match her energy. Most men don't lose women because they're too kind, too attentive, or too emotionally available. They lose them because the dynamic quietly slips out of balance, and they keep giving long after the other person has stopped meeting them halfway. Here's the lie men tell themselves. If I show more effort, she'll feel safer. She'll open up. She'll eventually meet me there. But attraction doesn't work on intention. It works on reciprocity. Connection needs rhythm. It needs movement, meeting movement. And when one person is sprinting while the other is barely walking, the imbalance becomes impossible to ignore, even if no one talks about it. Picture a man sending multiple messages throughout the day, small updates, check-ins, jokes he hopes will land. Hours pass. She replies once, maybe twice. Short answers, no questions back, no curiosity, and instead of noticing what's happening, he doubles down. He convinces himself that consistency will inspire effort. What she feels isn't inspiration, it's pressure. Overgiving doesn't pull a woman closer. It creates a subtle weight she starts to lean away from. Not because she's heartless, but because one-sided pursuit signals insecurity, not strength. Women are incredibly perceptive when it comes to emotional energy. They can feel the difference between a man who is choosing to invest and a man who is afraid to stop. And the moment your effort comes from fear of losing her, fear of being forgotten, fear that silence means failure, attraction begins to erode. Matching her energy isn't about becoming cold. It's not about playing games or acting detached. It's about dignity. It's about refusing to give more than what's being returned, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. If she texts with intention, respond with intention. If she calls, plans and shows up, meet her there fully. But if she pulls back, you don't rush forward to close the gap for her. You don't chase shadows. You don't keep performing just to keep the illusion alive. This is where men misunderstand power. They think power is pushing harder. It's not. Power is restraint. Power is allowing the dynamic to reveal itself without interference. When you stop over-functioning, one of two things happens. If she's genuinely interested, she adjusts. She starts leaning in. She begins matching you back because the space invites her to. And if she's not, her lack of investment becomes obvious. Not confusing, not ambiguous, just clear. And that clarity is not a loss. It's a gift. Matching energy doesn't create distance. It creates truth. It filters out connections that only exist because you were doing all the work. And it places you back in your proper position. Not as the man auditioning for attention, but as the man who expects balance without having to demand it. When effort becomes mutual, attraction flows naturally. And when it doesn't, you finally stop mistaking imbalance for potential. Number 3, reclaim your emotional control. There's a moment almost every man knows, even if he doesn't want to admit it. You send a message and then you wait. Not casually, attentively. Your phone stays within reach. Your focus fractures. Part of you keeps checking, even when you pretend you're not. If she replies quickly, your body relaxes. Your mood lifts. The day feels lighter. If she doesn't, something tightens in your chest. You reread the message. You wonder if you said the wrong thing. You tell yourself you don't care. But your attention says otherwise. That's not interest. That's emotional dependence. The moment your emotional state rises and falls based on her response time, you've handed over control. Not just of the interaction, but of your peace, your confidence, your internal stability. And here's the part most men miss. That shift doesn't stay invisible. Women feel it. They sense it in the tone of your messages, in the subtle urgency behind your words, in the way your energy leans forward, searching for reassurance. And once a woman realizes that her attention regulates your emotional state, something changes. Attraction weakens. Respect softens. Not because she's cruel, but because dependence never feels solid. Picture a man sitting at his desk, pretending to work. His phone lights up. It's not her. His stomach drops slightly. He tells himself it doesn't matter, but 2 minutes later he checks again. And again. He knows what he's doing, and that's what makes it worse. He feels controlled by something that hasn't even happened. This is the trap. When her replies become your emotional reward system, you stop being present in your own life. Your focus narrows. Your energy collapses inward. And instead of showing up grounded and self-contained, you show up waiting. Waiting to be chosen. Waiting to be confirmed. Waiting to feel okay again. Here's the shift that breaks that pattern. Her reply is information, not validation. It tells you how invested she is in that moment. Nothing more. It does not define your worth. It does not measure your value. And the second you stop treating it like a verdict on who you are, your internal posture changes. Reclaiming emotional control doesn't mean pretending you don't care. It means refusing to let a notification dictate your mood. It means redirecting your attention back where it belongs. Your work, your body, your goals, your friendships, your life. When your emotional center moves back inside yourself, something subtle happens. You slow down. You stop chasing clarity. You stop hovering over your phone. And paradoxically, that grounded presence is what women respond to. Not because you withdrew, but because you're no longer asking them to hold your emotional balance for you. Control your emotions, or they will quietly control how she sees you. And the moment you take that control back, the dynamic begins to shift. Not outwardly at first, but internally. And that internal shift is what makes everything else possible. Number 4. Let absence do the work. Most men believe they lose a woman the moment they pull back. The truth is, they often lose her because they never do. When you're always available, always checking in, always responding, always filling space, your presence stops being felt. And if your presence can't be felt, your absence never will be. Without absence, there is no contrast. And without contrast, there is no value. Think about anything you've ever desired. The excitement didn't come from constant access. It came from anticipation, from space, from not knowing exactly when you'd have it again. The moment something becomes unlimited, it stops feeling special. Not because it changed, but because the dynamic did. The same principle applies to attention. Many men confuse availability with reliability. They believe being there no matter what builds closeness. What it often builds instead is emotional numbness. When your energy is always on tap, she never has to reach for it. She never has to notice it. She never has to wonder where you are. And you can't miss what never leaves. Imagine a man who floods the connection with messages, updates, reassurance. He thinks he's nurturing something. He thinks he's building intimacy. But what he's really doing is overcrowding the space. There's no room for curiosity, no room for desire, no room for her to step forward. Absence isn't about disappearing. It's about stopping the over-delivery that makes your presence invisible. This is where men get defensive. They hear absence and assume manipulation. A tactic, a silent protest. That's not what this is. You're not pulling back to punish her. You're pulling back to return to a healthy baseline, one where your energy isn't being poured into someone who isn't pouring anything back. When you stop over-giving, something important happens. Her true level of interest rises to the surface. If she values you, she feels the shift. She notices the missing good morning text. She wonders why you're not as available. And without being prompted, she moves toward you. She reaches out. She initiates. She closes the distance you're no longer closing for her. And if she doesn't, the silence grows. Not because you caused it, but because you finally stopped cushioning it. That silence isn't rejection. It's clarity. Absence doesn't push the right woman away. It reveals her. It shows you whether she was invested in you or simply comfortable with the effort you provided. And that distinction matters more than any reassurance you could chase. Let absence do the work you've been doing for her. Let it answer the questions you've been afraid to ask. Because the moment you stop flooding the connection, the truth stops hiding. And truth, even when it stings, is always preferable to staying stuck in a dynamic that only survives because you refuse to step back. Number 5. Test her interest. There's a situation that traps more men than almost any other. She never initiates. She never reaches out first. But she always replies, just enough to keep the door cracked open. Just enough to keep you hoping. Just enough to make you doubt your instincts. Because she doesn't disappear completely, you tell yourself there must be something there. So you keep the momentum alive. You keep being the one who texts first, who follows up, who asks questions, who makes plans. And the entire time, you're stuck in limbo, unsure whether she's interested or simply entertained. Mixed signals survive because you keep filling the gaps. As long as you compensate for her low effort, she never has to reveal her true level of interest. She can stay comfortable, passive, ambiguous. And ambiguity feels safer than clarity when you're afraid of what the answer might be. Think about the man who sends the same good morning text every day. It's become part of her routine. Some days she replies, some days she doesn't. Some days it's hours later with a flat, emotionless message. But he keeps sending it anyway. Not because it's working, but because he's afraid that if he stops, the connection will vanish. Here's the truth he avoids. If something collapses the moment you stop carrying it, it was never standing on its own. Testing her interest doesn't mean playing games. It doesn't mean acting distant or dramatic. It means creating space for her to show up without you doing the work for her. It means stepping back with intention, not attitude. You stop being the first to text. You stop being the one who always follows up. You stop pouring energy into a connection that isn't pouring anything back. And then you observe. Does she notice the shift? Does she close the distance? Does she reach out, ask how you are, suggest seeing you? Or does the silence sit comfortably, like it costs her nothing at all? This approach does something powerful. It removes confusion without a single confrontation. You don't need explanations. You don't need reassurance. Her actions answer the question you've been avoiding. If she cares, she shows it. If she doesn't, she stays quiet. And that silence is not your failure. It's your clarity. You're not losing her. You're losing the illusion that she was invested. Because real interest doesn't need to be chased into existence. It doesn't survive on your effort alone. It meets you halfway, naturally, willingly, without pressure. When you stop performing, the truth steps forward. And once you see it clearly, you're no longer trapped in guessing. You're free to choose based on reality, not hope. Number 6. Raise your standards. At this point, the problem is no longer her silence. It's no longer her inconsistency, her delayed replies, or her lack of initiative. The real issue is the standard you've been willing to live with. When a man stays emotionally attached to someone who gives him crumbs, he's not acting out of love. He's acting out of fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of starting over. Fear that this might be the best he can get. And those fears quietly convince him to accept situations he would never tolerate if he were thinking clearly. This is how men end up bargaining with themselves. Maybe she's just bad at texting. Maybe she needs more time. Maybe she's dealing with something. So instead of protecting his self-respect, he protects his hope. He builds explanations to justify why he's the only one trying. And the longer he stays in that dynamic, the more normal it starts to feel. Picture a man who keeps a woman in his life, even though her investment is close to zero. She doesn't initiate. She doesn't plan. She doesn't show excitement. But she responds just enough to keep him attached. He tells himself that her minimal effort means something, because admitting it doesn't would force him to walk away. Here's the truth most men avoid facing. A man without standards becomes a man without options. When you tolerate neglect, you train yourself to believe that this is what connection looks like. You shrink your expectations to fit her indifference. And over time, you start mistaking bare minimum behavior for privilege instead of seeing it for what it is. Disinterest wrapped in comfort. Raising your standards doesn't mean becoming harsh or demanding. It means becoming honest. Honest about what you need. Honest about what you're receiving. Honest about whether the connection exists because it's mutual, or because you refuse to let go. Standards are not rules you impose on others. They are boundaries you set for yourself. They determine who gets access to your time, your energy, your emotional availability. And when you raise them, something powerful happens. The wrong women fall away effortlessly. The right ones don't make you guess. A woman who genuinely values you doesn't need to be convinced to care. She doesn't require constant reminders of your worth. She shows interest naturally. She initiates. She meets you in the middle because she wants to, not because you trained her to. Your value is not measured by how long you can hold on to someone who barely shows up. It's measured by how willing you are to walk away when you're not being met with respect. If she brings nothing, she gets nothing. Not out of revenge, out of self-respect. When you raise your standards, you don't lose women. You lose the ones who were only there because you were willing to accept less than you deserve. And what replaces them is something far more important: your sense of control, your clarity, and your identity as a man who knows his worth without having to prove it. That's the shift that changes everything. What you've just walked through isn't a strategy to get her to text you more. It's not about fixing her behavior, decoding her silence, or chasing clarity from someone who refuses to show up. This was about you. About what changes the moment you stop rewarding silence. When you stop matching effort with anxiety. When you take your emotional center back into your own hands. When you allow absence to reveal truth instead of fearing it. When you stop guessing and start observing. And when you finally raise your standards instead of lowering yourself. Because the real shift happens right here. Her silence no longer threatens you. It informs you. It tells you where she stands so you can decide where you stand. You stop forcing potential into reality. You stop clinging to what could be. And you start choosing what actually is. And in that place, something powerful happens. You're no longer the man waiting by the phone. You're no longer auditioning for attention. You're no longer mistaking crumbs for connection. You become grounded, clear, unshaken. The right woman doesn't need to be convinced to care. She doesn't require constant effort to stay engaged. She shows interest willingly, consistently, without confusion. Not because you chased her into it, but because she recognizes your value without hesitation. And if someone can only stay in your life when you overextend, over-explain, and over-invest, then losing that dynamic isn't a loss. It's relief. Value isn't something you pursue. It's something you embody. If this made you stop and reflect, it means something finally clicked. Subscribe if you're committed to staying in this frame, grounded, intentional, and self-respecting in every connection you build. And if you've lived through this dynamic, share your experience in the comments. Not to complain, but to speak from awareness. Because silence stops being confusing the moment you stop negotiating with it.